Rabbit Run by John Updike, continued. She asks, "Why can't you try to imagine how I feel? I've just had a baby." I can, but I don't want to. It's not the thing. The thing is how I feel, and I feel like getting out. Don't, Harry, don't. You can just lie there with your precious ass. Kiss it for me. Oh, for God's sake, she cries, and flounces under the covers and smashes her face down into her pillow. Even this late, he might have stayed if she hadn't accepted defeat by doing this. His need to love her is by, so there's no reason to go. He stopped loving her at last, so he might as well lie down beside her and go to sleep. But she asks for it, lying there in a muddle, sobbing, and outside, down in the town, a motor guns, and he thinks of the air and the trees and streets stretching bare under the street lamps, and goes out the door. The strange thing is, she falls asleep soon after he goes. She's been used to sleeping alone lately, and it's a physical relief not having him in bed, kicking his hot legs and twisting the sheets into ropes. That business of his with her bottom made her stitches ache, and she sinks down over the small pane, all feathers. Around 4 in the morning, Becky cries her awake, and she gets up. Her nightie taps her body lightly. Her skin feels unnaturally sensitive as she walks about. She changes the baby and lies down on the bed to nurse her. As Becky takes the milk, it's as if she's sucking a hollow place into her mother's body. Harry hasn't come back. By this time, if he just went out to cool off, he would be back. The baby keeps slipping off the nipple because she can't keep her mind on her. A taste like dry toast keeps touching her lips. She keeps listening for Harry's key to scratch at the door. Mother's neighbors will laugh their heads off if she loses him again. She doesn't know why she should think of Mother's neighbors, except that all the time she was home, Mother kept reminding her of how they sneered. And there was always that with Mother, the feeling she was dull and plain and a disappointment, and she thought when she got a husband it would be all over, all that. She would be a woman with a house on her own. And she thought when she gave this baby her name, it would settle her mother, but instead it brings her mother against her breast with her blind mouth, poor thing, and she feels she's lying on top of a pillar, where everyone in the town can see she is alone. She feels cold. The baby won't stay on the nipple. Nothing will hold to her. She gets up and walks around the room with the baby on her shoulder, patting to get the air up, and the baby, poor thing, so floppy and limp, keeps sliding and trying to dig its little boneless legs into her to hold tight, and the nightie, blown by the breeze, keeps touching her calves, the back of her legs, her ass, as he called it. Makes you feel filthy. They don't even have decent names for parts of you. If there would be a scratch at the lock and he would come in the door, he could do whatever he wanted with her, have any part of her if he wanted. What did she care? That was marriage. But when he tried tonight, it just seemed so unfair. She still aching, and him sleeping with that prostitute all those weeks, and him just saying roll over in that impatient voice, like it was just something he wanted to have done with. And who was she not to let him? After she had let him run off, what right had she to any pride? Any self-respect? That was just why she had to have some, because he didn't think she dared have any after she let him run off. That was the funny thing. It was his bad deed, yet she was supposed not to have any pride afterwards, to be just a pot for his dirt. When he did that to her back, it was so practiced and reminded her of all those weeks he was off doing what he pleased, and she was just helpless, Mother and Peggy feeling sorry for her, and everybody else laughing. She couldn't bear it. And then his going off to church and coming back full of juice. What right did he have to go to church? What did he and God talk about behind the backs of all these women exchanging winks? That was the thing she minded. If they'd just think about love when they make it, instead of thinking about whatever they do think about whatever they're going to do whenever they've got rid of this little hot clot that's bothering them. You can feel in their fingers if they're thinking about you, and tonight Harry was at first, and that's why she let him go on. It was like lying there in an envelope of yourself, his hands going around you. But then he began to be rough, and it made her mad to feel him thinking about himself, what a good job he was doing, sucking her along, and not at all any more about how she felt exhausted and aching. poking his thing at her belly like some elbow. It was so rude. Just plain rude. Here he called her dumb, when he was too dumb to have any idea of how she felt, any idea of how his going off had changed her, and how he must nurse her back, not just wade in through her skin without having any idea of what was there. That was what made her panicky. Ever since she was little, this thing of nobody knowing how you felt, and whether nobody could know or nobody cared, she had no idea. She didn't like her skin. Never had. It was too dark, made her look like an Italian, even if she never did get pimples like some of the other girls. And then in those days, both working at Kroll's, she on the salted nuts, when Harry would lie down beside her on Mary Hanatcher's bed, the silver wallpaper he liked so much, and close his eyes, it seemed to melt her skin, and she thought it was all over. She was with somebody. But then they were married. She felt awful about being pregnant before, but Harry had been talking about marriage for a year, and anyway laughed when she told him and said, "Great." She was terribly frightened, and he said, "Great," and lifted her. Put his arms around under her bottom and lifted her like you would a child. He could be so wonderful when you didn't expect it. In a way, it seemed important that you didn't expect it. There was so much nice in him. She couldn't explain to anybody. She had been so frightened about being pregnant, and he made her be proud. They were married, and she was still little clumsy, dark-complected Janice Springer, and her husband was a conceited lunk who wasn't good for anything in the world, Daddy said. And the feeling of being alone would melt a little with a little drink. It wasn't so much that it dissolved the lump as made the edges nice and rainbowy. She's been walking around, patting the baby until her wrists and ankles hurt, and poor tiny Rebecca is asleep with her legs around the breast that still has all its milk in it. She wonders if she should try to make her take some, and thinks, no, if she can sleep, let her sleep. She lifts the poor tiny thing, weighing nothing, off the sweaty place on her shoulder, and lays her down in the cool shadows of the crib. Already the night is dimming. Dawn comes early to the town, facing east on its mountainside. Janice lies down on the bed, but the sense of light growing beside her on the white sheets keeps her awake. Pleasantly awake at first. The coming of morning is so clean, and makes her feel like she did through the second month Harry was hiding. Mother's great Japanese cherry tree blooming below her window, and the grass coming up, and the ground smelling wet and ashy and warm. She had thought things out and was resigned to her marriage being finished. She would have her baby and get a divorce and never get married again. She would be like a kind of nun. She had just seen that beautiful picture with Audrey Hepburn. And if he came back, it would be equally simple. She would forgive him everything and stop her drinking, which annoyed him so, though she didn't see why, and they would be very nice and simple and clean together, because he would have gotten everything out of his system, and love her so, because she had forgiven him. And she would know now how to be a good wife. She had gone to church every week, and talked with Peggy, and prayed, and had come to understand that marriage wasn't a refuge, it was a sharing, and she and Harry would start to share everything. And then, it was a miracle, these last 2 weeks had been that way. And then Harry had suddenly put his horror's filthiness into it, and asked her to love it, and the unfairness makes her cry aloud, softly, as if startled by something in the empty bed with her. The last hours are like some narrow turn in a pipe that she can't force her thought through. Again and again she comes up to the sound of him saying, "Roll over," and can't squeeze through it, can't not feel panicked and choked. She gets out of bed and wanders around with her one tight breast, the nipple stinging, and goes into the kitchen in her bare feet and sniffs the empty glass Harry made her drink whiskey out of. The smell is dark and raw and soft and deep, and she thinks maybe a sip will cure her insomnia, make her sleep until the scratch at the door awakens her, and she sees his big white body ramble in sheepishly, and she can say, "Come to bed, Harry, it's all right, do me. I want to share it. I really want it, really." She puts just an inch of whiskey in, and not much water because it would take too long to drink, and no ice cubes because the noise of the tray might wake up the children. She takes this dose to the window and stands looking down past the 3 tar roofs at the sleeping town. Already a few kitchen and bedroom lights show pale here and there. A car, its headlights dull discs that do not throw beams into the thinning darkness, eases down Wilbur toward the center of town. The highway, half hidden by the silhouettes of houses, like a river between banks of trees, this early swishes with traffic. She feels the workday approaching like an army of light, feels the dark ridged houses beneath her as potentially stirring, waking, opening like castles to send forth their men, and regrets that her own husband is unable to settle into the nationwide rhythm of which one more beat is about to sound. Why him? What was so precious about him? Anger at Harry begins to bloom, and to stifle it she drains the glass and turns in the dawn. Everything in the apartment is a shade of brown. She feels lopsided. The pressure in the unused breast pulls her. She goes into the kitchen and makes another drink, stronger than the first, thinking that after all it's about time she had a little fun. She hadn't had a moment to herself since she came back from the hospital. The thought of fun makes her movements quick and airy. She fairly runs in her bare feet across the gritty carpet back to the window, as if to a show arranged just for her. Mounted in her white gown above everything she can see, she touches her fingers to her tight breast so that the milk starts to leak, stains the white cloth with slow warmth. The wetness slides down her front and turns cold in the air by the window. Her varicose veins ache from standing. She goes and sits in the moldy brown armchair and is sickened by just the angle at which the mottled wall meets the pasty ceiling. The angle tips her, muddles up and down. The pattern on the wallpaper swarms. The flowers are brown spots that swim in the murk and chase each other and merge hungrily. It's hateful. She turns her face away and studies the calm green globe of the dead television set. The front of her nightie is drying. The crusty stiffness scratches her. Baby book said keep nipples clean, soap gently, germs enter scratches. She sets the drink on the round chair arm and stands up and pulls her nightgown over her head and sits down again. It gives her nakedness a mossy hug. She puts the bunched nightgown in her lap on top of her modeste pad and belt and pulls the footstool over cleverly with her toes and rests her ankles on it and admires her legs. She always thought she had good legs. Straight, small, nice, even thighs. She does have good legs. Their tapering, wavering silhouettes are white against the deep shadow of the rug. The dim light erases the blue veins left from carrying Becky. She wonders if her legs are going to go as bad as Mother's. She tries to imagine the ankles as thick as the knees, and they do seem to swell. She reaches down to reassure herself by feeling the ankle's hard, narrow bones, and her shoulder knocks the whiskey glass off the chair arm. She jumps up, startled to feel the air embrace her bare skin, cool space sweep around her wobbly, knobbed body. She giggles. If Harry could see her now. Luckily, there wasn't much in the glass. She tries to walk boldly into the kitchen with no clothes on, like a whore, but the sense of somebody watching her, which began when she stood at the window and made her milk flow, is too strong. She ducks into the bedroom and wraps the blue bathrobe around her and then mixes the drink. There is still a third of the bottle left. Tiredness makes the rims of her lids dry, but she has no desire to go back to bed. She has a horror of it because Harry should be there. This absence is a hole that widens, and she pours a little whiskey into it, but it's not enough. And when she goes to the window for the third time, it is now light enough to see how drab everything is. Someone has smashed a bottle on one of the tar roofs. The gutters of Wilbur Street are full of mud that washes down from the new development. While she looks, the street lights, great pale strings of them, go off in patches. She pictures the man at the power plant pulling the switches, little and gray and hunchbacked and very sleepy. She goes to the television set, and the band of light that suddenly flares in the green rectangle sparks joy in her breast, but it's still too early. The light is just a speckling, senseless brightness, and the sound is nothing but static. As she sits there watching the blank radiance, a feeling of some other person standing behind her makes her snap her head around several times. She is very quick about it. But there is always a space she can't see, which the other person could dodge into if he's there. It's the television has called him into the room, but when she turns off the set, she starts to cry immediately. She sits there with her face in her hands, her tears crawling out between her fingers, and her sobs shaking through the apartment. She doesn't stifle them because she wants to wake somebody. She is sick of being alone. In the bleaching light, the walls and furniture are clear and regain their colors, and the merging brown spots have gone into herself. She goes and looks at the baby, the poor thing lying there snuffling the crib sheet, its little hands twitching up by its ears, and reaches down and strokes its hot membranous head, and lifts it out, its legs all wet, and takes it to nurse in the armchair that looks toward the window. The sky beyond is a pale, smooth blue that looks painted on the panes. There is nothing to see but sky from this chair. They might be 100 miles up, in the basket of a great balloon. A door on the other side of the partition slams, and her heart leaps, but then, of course, it's just another tenant, maybe grumpy Mr. Capello, going off to work. The stairs rumbling reluctantly. This wakes Nelson, and for a time her hands are full. In making breakfast for them, she breaks an orange juice glass. It just drifts away from her thumb into the brittle sink. When she bends over Nelson to serve him his Rice Krispies, he looks up at her and wrinkles his nose. He smells sadness, and its familiar odor makes him timid with her. "Daddy go away?" He's such a good boy, saying this to make it easy on her. All she has to do is answer, yes. "No," she says. "Daddy went out to work early this morning before you got up. He'll be home for supper like he always is." The child frowns at her and then parrots with sharp hope, "Like always is?" Worry has stretched his head high, so his neck seems a stem too thin to support the ball of his skull with its broad whorl of pillow-mussed hair. "Daddy will be home," she repeats. Having taken on herself the burden of lying, she needs a little more whiskey for support. There is a murk inside her which she must tint a bright color or collapse. She takes the dishes out to the kitchen, but they slide so in her hands she doesn't try to wash them. She thinks she must change out of her bathrobe into a dress, but in taking the steps into the bedroom forgets her purpose and begins making the bed. But something whose presence she feels on the wrinkled bed frightens her, so that she draws back and goes into the other room to be with the children. It's as if in telling them Harry would be back as normal, she's put a ghost in the apartment. But the other person does not feel like Harry. It feels like a burglar, a teasing burglar dancing from room to room ahead of her. When she picks up the baby again, she feels its wet legs and thinks of changing it, but cleverly realizes she is drunk and might stab it with the pins. She is very proud of thinking this through, and tells herself to stay away from the bottle so she can change the baby in an hour. She puts good Becky in her crib, and wonderfully doesn't hear her cry once. She and Nelson sit and watch the tail end of Dave Garroway, and then a program about Elizabeth and her husband entertaining a friend of his who is always going away on camping trips, being a bachelor, and turns out to be a better cook than Elizabeth. For some reason, watching this makes her so nervous that just out of television watching habit, she goes to the kitchen and makes herself a little drink, mostly ice cubes, just to keep sealed shut the great hole that is threatening to pull open inside of her again. She takes just a sip, and it's like a swallow of blue light that makes everything clear. She must just arch over this one little gap, and at the end of the day, after work, Harry will be back, and no one will ever know. No one will laugh at Mother. She feels like a rainbow arching protectively over Harry, who seems infinitely small under her, like some children's toy. She thinks how good it would be to play with Nelson. It is bad for him to watch television all morning. She turns it off and finds his coloring book and crayons, and they sit on the rug and color opposite pages. Janice repeatedly hugs him and talks to make him laugh, and is very happy doing the actual coloring. In high school, art was the one subject she wasn't afraid of, and she always got a B. She smiles in the delight of coloring her page, a barnyard, so well, of feeling the little rods of color in her fingers make such neat parallel strokes, and her son's small body intent and hard beside hers. Her bathrobe fans out on the floor around her, and her body seems beautiful and broad. She moves to get her shadow off the page and sees that she has colored one chicken partly green and not stayed within the lines at all well, and her page is ugly. She starts to cry. It's so unfair, as if someone standing behind her without understanding a thing has told her her coloring is ugly. Nelson looks up, and his quick face slides wide, and he cries, "Don't, Mommy." She prepares to have him pitch forward into her lap, but instead he jumps up and runs, with a lopsided, almost crippled set of steps into the bedroom, and falls on the floor, kicking. She pushes herself up from the floor with a calm smile and goes into the kitchen, where she thinks she left her drink. The important thing is to complete the arch to the end of the day, to be a protection for Harry. And it's silly not to have the one more sip that will make her long enough. She comes out of the kitchen and tells Nelson, "Mommy stopped crying, sweet. It was a joke. Mommy's not crying. Mommy's very happy. She loves you very much." His rubbed, stained face watches her. Like a stab from behind, the phone rings. Still carrying that calmness, she answers it. "Hello? Darling, it's Daddy." "Oh, Daddy!" Joy just streams through her lips. He pauses. "Baby, is Harry sick? It's after 11 and he hasn't shown up at the lot yet." "No, he's fine. We're all fine." There is another pause. Her love for her father flows toward him through the silent wire. She wishes the conversation would go on forever. He asks, "Well, where is he? Is he there? Let me speak to him, Janice." "Daddy, he's not here. He went out early this morning." "Where did he go? He's not at the lot." She's heard him say the word lot 1,000,000 times, it seems. He says it like no other man. It's dense and rich from his lips, as if all the world is concentrated in it. All the good things of her growing up, her clothes, her toys, their house, came from the lot. She is inspired. Car sale talk is one thing she knows. "He went out early, Daddy, to show a station wagon to a prospect who had to go to work or something. Wait, let me think. He said the man had to go to Allentown early this morning. He had to go to Allentown, and Harry had to show him a station wagon. Everything's all right, Daddy. Harry loves his job." The third pause is the longest. "Darling, are you sure he's not there?" "Daddy, aren't you funny? He's not here. See?" As if it has eyes, she thrusts the receiver into the air of the empty room. It's meant as a daughter's impudent joke, but unexpectedly just holding her arm out makes her feel sick. When she brings the receiver back to her ear, he is saying in a remote, ticky voice, "Darling, all right, don't worry about anything. Are the children there with you?" Feeling dizzy, she hangs up. This is a mistake, but she thinks on the whole she's been clever enough. She thinks she deserves a drink. The brown liquid spills down over the smoking ice cubes and doesn't stop when she tells it to. She snaps the bottle angrily, and blot-shaped drops topple into the sink. She goes into the bathroom with the glass and comes out with her hands empty and a taste of toothpaste in her mouth. She remembers looking into the mirror and patting her hair, and from that she went to brushing her teeth, with Harry's toothbrush. She discovers herself making lunch, like looking down into a food advertisement in a magazine, bacon strips sizzling in a pan at the end of a huge blue arm. She sees the BBs of fat flying in the air, like the pretty spatter of a fountain in a park, and wonders at how quick their arcs are. They prick her hand on the handle, and she turns the purple gas down. She pours a glass of milk for Nelson, and pulls some leaves off of a head of lettuce, and sets them on a yellow plastic plate, and eats a handful herself. She thinks she won't set a place for herself, and then thinks she will, because maybe this trembling in her stomach is hunger, and gets another plate and stands there holding it with two hands in front of her chest, wondering why Daddy was so sure Harry was here. There is another person in the apartment, she knows, but it's not Harry, and the person has no business here anyway, and she determines to ignore him and continues setting lunch with a slight stiffness operating in her body. She holds on to everything until it is well on the table. Nelson says the bacon is greasy and asks again if Daddy go away, and his complaining about the bacon, that she was so clever and brave to make it all, annoys her, so that after his 20th refusal to eat even a bit of lettuce, she reaches over and slaps his rude face. The stupid child can't even cry. He just sits there and stares and sucks in his breath again and again, and finally does burst forth. But luckily she is equal to the situation, very calm. She sees the unreason of his whole attempt and refuses to be bullied. With the smoothness of a single great wave, she makes his bottle, takes him by the hand, oversees his urinating, and settles him in bed. Still shaking with the aftermath of sobs, he roots the bottle in his mouth, and she is certain from the glaze on his watchful eyes that he is locked into the channel to sleep. She stands by the bed, surprised by her stern strength. The telephone rings again, angrier than the first time, and as she runs to it, running because she does not want Nelson disturbed, she feels her strength ebb, and a brown staleness washes up the back of her throat. "Hello? Janice?" Her mother's voice, even and harsh. "I just got back from shopping in Brewer, and your father's been trying to reach me all morning. He thinks Harry's gone again. Is he?" Janice closes her eyes and says, "He went to Allentown." "What would he do there?" "He's going to sell a car." "Don't be silly, Janice. Are you all right?" "What do you mean?" "Have you been drinking?" "Drinking what?" "Now don't worry, I'm coming right over." "Mother, don't. Everything is fine. I just put Nelson into his nap." "I'll have a bite to eat out of the icebox and come right over. You lie down." "Mother, please don't come over." "Janice, now don't talk back. When did he go?" "Stay away, Mother. He'll be back tonight." She listens and adds, "And stop crying." Her mother says, "Yes, you say stop when you keep bringing us all into disgrace. The first time I thought it was all his fault, but I'm not so sure anymore. Do you hear? I'm not so sure." Hearing this speech has made the sliding sickness in her so steep, she wonders if she can keep her grip on the phone. "Don't come over, Mother," she begs. "Please. I'll have a bite of lunch and be over in 20 minutes. You go to bed." Janice replaces the receiver and looks around her with horror. The apartment is horrible. Coloring books on the floor, glasses, the bed unmade, dirty dishes everywhere. She runs to where she and Nelson crayoned and tests bending over. She drops to her knees and the baby begins to cry. Panicked with the double idea of not disturbing Nelson and of concealing Harry's absence, she runs to the crib and nightmarishly finds it smeared with orange mess. Damn you, she moans to Rebecca, and lifts the little filthy thing out and wonders where to carry her. She takes her to the armchair and, biting her lips, unpins the diaper. "You little pig," she murmurs, feeling that the sound of her voice is holding off the other person who is gathering in the room. She takes the soaped, daubed diaper to the bathroom and drops it in the toilet, and dropping to her knees, fumbles the bathtub plug into its hole. She pulls on both faucets as wide as they will go, knowing from experiment that both opened wide make the right tepid mixture. The water bangs out of the faucet like a fist. She notices the glass of watery whiskey she left on the top of the toilet and takes a long, stale swallow, and then puzzles how to get it off her hands. All the while, Rebecca screams, as if she has mind enough to know she's filthy. Janice takes the glass with her and spills it on the rug with her knee while she strips the baby of its nightie and sweater. She carries the sopping clothes to the television set and puts them on top while she drops to her knees and tries to stuff the crayons back into their box. Her head aches with all this jarring up and down. She takes the crayons to the kitchen table and dumps the uneaten bacon and lettuce into the paper bag under the sink. But the mouth of the bag leans partly closed, and the lettuce falls behind into the darkness and back of the can, and she crouches down with her head pounding to try to see it or get it with her fingers, and is unable. Her knees sting from so much kneeling. She gives up, and to her surprise sits flatly on a kitchen chair and looks at the gaudy, soft noses of the crayons poking out of the Crayola box. Hide the whiskey. Her body doesn't move for a second, but when it does, she sees her hands with the little lines of dirt on her fingernails put the whiskey bottle into a lower cabinet with some old shirts of Harry's she was saving for Rags. He would never wear a mended shirt, not that she was any good at mending them. She shuts the door. It bangs but doesn't catch, and on the edge of linoleum, beside the sink, the cork cap of the whiskey bottle stares at her like a little top hat. She puts it in the garbage bag. Now the kitchen is clean enough. In the living room, Rebecca is lying naked in the fuzzy armchair with her belly puffing out sideways to yell, and her lumpy, curved legs clenched and red. Janice's other baby was a boy, and it still seems unnatural to her between the girl's legs, those two little buns of fat instead of a boy's triple business. When the doctor had Nelson circumcised, Harry hadn't wanted him to, he hadn't been, and thought it was unnatural, she had laughed at him, he was so mad. The baby's face goes red with each squall, and Janice closes her eyes and thinks how really horrible it is of Mother to come and ruin her day just to make sure she's lost Harry again. She can't wait a minute to find out, and this awful baby can't wait a minute, and there are the clothes on top of the television set. She takes them into the bathroom and drops them into the toilet on top of the diaper and turns off the faucets. The wavery gray line of the water is almost up to the lip of the tub. On the skin, quick wrinkles wander, and under it a deep mass waits colorless. She wishes she could have the bath. Brimful of composure, she returns to the living room. She tips too much trying to dig the tiny rubbery thing out of the chair, so drops to her knees and scoops Rebecca into her arms and carries her into the bathroom, held sideways against her breasts. She is proud to be carrying this to completion. The baby will be clean. She drops gently to her knees by the big, calm tub and does not expect her sleeves to be soaked. The water wraps around her forearms like two large hands. Under her amazed eyes, the pink baby sinks down like a gray stone. With a sob of protest, she grapples for the child, but the water pushes up at her hands. Her bathrobe tends to float, and the slippery thing squirms in the sudden opacity. She has a hold, feels a heartbeat on her thumb, and then loses it, and the skin of the water leaps with pale, refracted oblongs that she can't seize the solid of. It is only a moment, but a moment dragged out in a thicker time. Then she has Becky squeezed in her hands, and it is all right. She lifts the living thing into air and hugs it against her sopping chest. Water pours off them onto the bathroom tiles. The little weightless body flops against her neck, and a quick look of relief at the baby's face gives a fantastic clotted impression. A contorted memory of how they give artificial respiration pumps Janice's cold, wet arms in frantic, rhythmic hugs. Under her clenched lids, great scarlet prayers arise, wordless, monotonous, and she seems to be clasping the knees of a vast third person whose name, Father, Father, beats against her head like physical blows. Though her wild heart bathes the universe in red, no spark kindles in the space between her arms. For all of her pouring prayers, she doesn't feel the faintest tremor of an answer in the darkness against her. Her sense of the third person with them widens enormously, and she knows, while knocks sound at the door, that the worst thing that has ever happened to any woman in the world has happened to her. Jack comes back from the telephone, a shocking color. Janice Angstrom has accidentally drowned their baby. How could she? I don't know. I'm afraid she was drunk. She's unconscious now. Where was he? Nobody knows. I'm supposed to find him. That was Mrs. Springer. He sits down in the great walnut-armed chair that had been his father's, and Lucy realizes with resentment that her husband is middle-aged. His hair is thinning. His skin is dry. He looks exhausted. She cries, "Why must you spend your life chasing after that worthless heel? He's not worthless. I love him." "You love him. That's sickening. Oh, I think that's sickening, Jack. Why don't you try loving me, or your children?" "I do." "You don't, Jack. Let's face it, you don't. You couldn't bear to love anybody who might return it. You're afraid of that, aren't you? Aren't you afraid?" They had been drinking tea in the library when the phone rang, and he picks his empty cup off the floor between his feet and looks into the center. "Don't be fancy, Lucy," he says. "I feel too sick." "You feel sick, yes, and I feel sick. I've felt sick ever since you got involved with that animal. He's not even in your church." "Any Christian is in my church." "Christian? If he's a Christian, thank God I'm not one." Christian. Kills his baby, and that's what you call him. He didn't kill the baby. He wasn't there. It was an accident. Well, he as good as did. Runs off and sends his idiot wife on a bender. You never should have brought them back together. The girl had adjusted, and something like this never would have happened. Eccles blinks. Shock has put a great analytic distance between him and things. He's rather impressed by the way she has reconstructed what must have happened. He wonders a little why her speech is so vengeful. Heal was a strange word for her to have used. So you're saying I really killed the baby, he says. Of course not. I didn't mean to say that at all. No, I think you're probably right, he says, and lifts himself out of the chair. He goes into the hall to the telephone and again draws out of his wallet the number written in pencil below the faint name Ruth Leonard. The number worked once, but this time the mouse of electricity gnaws at the remote membrane of metal in vain. He lets it ring 12 times, hangs up, dials the number again, and hangs up after 7 rings. When he returns to the study, Lucy is ready for him. Jack, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to suggest you were responsible at all. Of course you're not. Don't be silly. It's all right, Lucy. The truth shouldn't be able to hurt us. These words are a shadow of his idea that if faith is true, then nothing that is true is in conflict with faith. Oh, mercy, the martyr. Well, I can see it's an idea you have that it's your fault, and nothing I can say will change your mind. I'll save my breath. He keeps silent to help her save her breath, but after a moment she asks in a softer voice, Jack? What? Why were you so anxious to get them back together? He picks the slice of lemon up from the saucer of his teacup and tries to squint through it into the room. Marriage is a sacrament, he says. He half expects her to laugh, but instead she asks earnestly, even a bad marriage? Yes. But that's ridiculous. That's not common sense. I don't believe in common sense, he says. If it'll make you happy, I don't believe in anything. That doesn't make me happy, she says. You're being psychopathic. But I'm sorry this has happened. She takes away their cups and swishes into the kitchen and leaves him alone. Afternoon shadows gather like cobwebs on the walls of books, most of them belonging not to him, but to his predecessor in the rectory, the noble and much admired Dr. Langhorne. He sits waiting numbly, but not too long. The phone rings. He hurries to answer it before Lucy can. Through the window above the sill where the phone rests, he can see his neighbor unpinning her wash from the line. Hello? Hey, Jack, this is Harry Angstrom. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. No, you're not. You don't have any old ladies sitting around sewing or anything, do you? No? Why, I've been trying to call my apartment and nobody answers, and I'm kind of nervous about it. I didn't spend last night there, and I'm getting sort of a prickly feeling. I want to go home, but I want to know if Janice has done anything like call the cops or anything. Do you know? Harry, where are you? Oh, at some drugstore in Brewer. The neighbor has bundled the last sheet into her arms, and Jack's sight leans on the bare white line. One of the uses society seems to have for him is to break tragic news, and the cave of his mouth goes dry as he braces for the familiar duty. No man having put his hand to the plow. He keeps his eyes wide open so he will not seem too close to the presence by his ear. I guess, to save time, I'd better tell you over the phone, he begins. Harry, a terrible thing has happened to us. When you twist a rope and keep twisting, it begins to lose its straight shape, and suddenly a kink, a loop, leaps up in it. Harry has such a hard loop in himself after he hears Eccles out. He doesn't know what he says to Eccles. All he is conscious of is the stacks of merchandise and jangling packages he can see through the windows of the phone booth door. On the drugstore wall, there is a banner bearing in red the one word, paradichlorobenzene. All the while he is trying to understand Eccles, he is rereading this word, trying to see where it breaks, wondering if it can be pronounced. Right when he finally understands, right at the pit of his life, a fat woman comes up to the counter and pays for 2 boxes of Kleenex. He steps into the sunshine outside the drugstore, swallowing, to keep the loop from rising in his body and choking him. It's a hot day, the first of summer. The heat comes up off the glittering pavement into the faces of pedestrians, strikes them sideways off the store windows and hot stone facades. In the white light, faces wear the American expression, eyes squinting and mouths sagging open in a scowl that makes them look as if they are about to say something menacing and cruel. In the street, under glaring hardtops, drivers bake in stalled traffic. Above, milk hangs in a sky that seems too exhausted to clear. Harry waits at a corner with some red, sweating shoppers for a Mount Judge bus, number 16A. When it hisses to a stop, it is already packed. He hangs from a steel bar in the rear, fighting to keep from doubling up with the kink inside. Curved posters advertise filtered cigarettes and suntan lotion and an international charity. He had ridden one of these buses last night into Brewer and gone to Ruth's apartment, but there was no light on and nobody answered his ring, though there was a dim light behind the frosted glass-lettered FX Pellegrini. He sat around on the steps, looking down at the delicatessen until the lights went out, and then looking at the bright church window. When the lights went out behind that, he felt cramped and hopeless and thought of going home. He wandered up to Weiser Street and looked down at all the lights and the great sunflower and couldn't see a bus and kept walking over to the south side and became afraid of getting knifed and robbed and went into a low-looking hotel and bought a room. He didn't sleep very well with a neon tube with a taped connection buzzing outside and some woman laughing, and woke up early enough to go back to Mount Judge and get a suit and go to work. But something held him back. Something held him back all day. He tries to think of what it was because, whatever it was, murdered his daughter. Wanting to see Ruth again was some of it, but it was clear after he went around to her address in the morning that she wasn't there, probably off to Atlantic City with some madman, and still he wandered around Brewer, going in and out of department stores with music piping from the walls, and eating a hot dog at the 5 and 10, and hesitating outside a movie house, but not going in, and keeping an eye out for Ruth. He kept expecting to see her shoulders that he kissed jostle out of a crowd and the ginger hair he used to beg to unpin shining on the other side of a rack of birthday cards. But it was a city of over 100,000, and the odds were totally against him. And anyway, there was tons of time he could find her another day. No, what kept him in the city, despite the increasing twisting inside that told him something was wrong back home, what kept him walking through the cold air, breathed from the doors of movie houses, and up and down between counters of perfumed lingerie, thinking of all the delicate ass these veils would flavor the little tits to be tucked into these cups, and jewelry, and salted nuts, poor old Jan, and up into the park along paths he walked once with Ruth to watch from under a horse-chestnut tree 5 mangy kids play cat with a tennis ball and a broomstick, and then finally back down Weiser to the drugstore he called from. What kept him walking was the idea that somewhere he'd find an opening. For what made him mad at Janice wasn't so much that she was in the right for once and he was wrong and stupid, but the closed feeling of it, the feeling of being closed in. He had gone to church and brought back this little flame and had nowhere to put it on the dark, damp walls of the apartment, so it had flickered and gone out. And the feeling that he wouldn't always be able to produce this flame. What held him back all day was the feeling that somewhere there was something better for him than listening to babies cry and cheating people in used car lots, and it's this feeling he tries to kill right there on the bus. He grips the chrome bar and leans far over 2 women with white pleated blouses and laps of packages, and closes his eyes and tries to kill it. The kink in his stomach starts to take the form of nausea, and he clings to the icy bar bitterly as the bus swings around the mountain. He gets off in a sweat, blocks too soon. Here in Mount Judge, the shadows have begun to grow deep. The sun-baking Brewer rides the crest of the mountain, and his sweat congeals, shortening his breath. He runs to keep his body occupied, to joggle his mind blank. Past a dry-cleaning plant with a little pipe hissing steam at the side, through the oil and rubber smells riding above the asphalt pond around the red pumps of an Esso station. past the Mount Judge Town Hall lawn and the World War II honor roll with the name plaques crumbled and blistered behind glass. When he gets to the Springer's house, Mrs. comes to the door and shuts it in his face, but he knows from the olive Buick parked outside that Eccles is in there, and in a little while Jack comes to the door and lets him in. He says softly in the dim hall, "Your wife has been given a sedative and is asleep. The baby? The undertaker has her." Rabbit wants to cry out. It seems indecent for the undertaker to be taking such a tiny body, that they ought to bury it in its own simplicity, like the body of a bird, in a small hole dug in the grass. But he nods. He feels he will never resist anything again. Eccles goes upstairs, and Harry sits in a chair and watches the light from the window play across an iron table of ferns and African violets and cacti. Where it hits the leaves, they are bright yellow-green. The leaves in shadow in front of them look like black-green holes cut in this golden color. Somebody comes down the stairs with an erratic step. He doesn't turn his head to see who it is. He doesn't want to risk looking anybody in the face. A furry touch on his forearm, and he meets Nelson's eyes. The child's face is stretched shiny with curiosity. "Mommy, sleep," he says in a deep voice, imitating the tragedy-struck voices he has been hearing. Rabbit pulls him up into his lap. He's heavier and longer than he used to be. His body acts as a covering. He pulls the boy's head down against his neck. Nelson asks, "Baby sick?" "Baby sick." Big water in tub," Nelson says, and struggles to sit up so he can explain with his arms, which go wide. Many water," he says. He must have seen it. He wants to get off his father's lap, but Harry holds him fast with a kind of terror. The house is thick with a grief that seems to threaten the boy. Also, the boy's body wriggles with an energy that threatens the grief, might tip it and bring the whole house crashing down on them. It is himself he is protecting by imprisoning the child. Eccles comes downstairs and stands there studying them. "Why don't you take him outside?" he asks. "He's had a nightmare of a day." They all three go outdoors. Eccles takes Harry's hand in a long, quiet grip and says, "Stay here. You're needed, even if they don't tell you." After Eccles pulls away in his Buick, he and Nelson sit in the grass by the driveway and throw bits of gravel down toward the pavement. The boy laughs and talks in excitement, but out here the sound is not so loud. Harry feels thinly protected by the fact that this is what Eccles told him to do. Men are walking home from work along the pavement. Nelson nearly gets one with a pebble. They change their target to a green lawn cedar leaning against the wall of the garage. Harry hits it 4 times running. Though the air is still light, the sunshine has shrunk to a few scraps in the tops of trees. The grass is growing damp, and he wonders if he should sneak Nelson in the door and go. Mr. Springer comes to the door and calls, "Harry!" They go over. "Becky's made a few sandwiches in place of supper," he says. "You and the boy come in." They go into the kitchen, and Nelson eats. Harry refuses everything except a glass of water. Mrs. Springer is not in the kitchen, and Harry is grateful. Her hate of him lingers in the room like a smell. "Harry," Mr. Springer says, and stands up, patting his mustache with 2 fingers, like he's about to make a financial concession. "Reverend Eccles and Becky and I have had a talk. I won't say I don't blame you, because of course I do. But you're not the only one to blame. Her mother and I somehow never made her feel secure. Never, perhaps you might say, made her welcome, I don't know." His little pink, crafty eyes are not crafty now, blurred and chafed. "We tried, I'd like to think. At any rate," this comes out harsh and crackly. He pauses to regain quietness in his voice. "Life must go on. Am I making any sense to you?" "Yes, sir." "Life must go on. We must go ahead now with what we have left. Though Becky's too upset to see you now, she agrees. We had a talk and agree that it's the only way. What I mean to say, I can see you're puzzled, is that we consider you in our family, Harry, despite—" He lifts an arm vaguely toward the stairs. "This." His arm slumps back and he adds the word, "accident." Harry shields his eyes with his hand. They feel hot and vulnerable to light. "Thank you," he says, and almost moans in his gratitude to this man, whom he has always despised, for making a speech so generous. He tried to frame, in accordance with an etiquette that continues to operate in the thick of grief as if under water, a counter-speech. "I promise I'll keep my end of the bargain," he brings out, and stops, stifled by the abject sound of his voice. What made him say bargain? "I know you will," Springer says. "Reverend Eccles assures us you will." "Dessert," Nelson says distinctly. "Nellie, why don't you take a cookie to bed?" Springer speaks with a familiar jollity that, though strained, reminds Rabbit that the kid lived here for months. "Isn't it your bedtime? Shall Mom take you up?" "Daddy," Nelson says, and slides off his chair and comes to his father. Both men are embarrassed. "Okay," Rabbit says, "you show me your room." Springer gets 2 Oreo cookies out of the pantry, and unexpectedly Nelson runs forward to hug him. He stoops to accept the hug, and his withered dandy's face goes blank against the boy's cheek. His unfocused eyes stare at Rabbit's shoes, and big black square cufflinks, thinly rimmed and initialed S in gold, creep out of his coat sleeves as his arms tighten the hug. As Nelson leads his father to the stairs, they pass the room where Mrs. Springer is sitting. Rabbit has a glimpse of a puffed face, slippery with tears, and averts his eyes. He whispers to Nelson to go in and kiss her good night. When the boy returns to him, they go upstairs and down a smooth corridor papered with the design of old-style cars, into a little room whose white curtains are tinted green by a tree outside. On either side of the window, symmetrical pictures, one of kittens and one of puppies, are hung. He wonders if this was the room where Janice was little. It has a musty innocence and a suspense, as if it stood empty for years. An old teddy bear, the fur worn down to cloth and one eye void, sits in a broken child's rocker. Had it been Janice's? Who pulled the eye out? Nelson becomes queerly passive in this room. Harry undresses the sleepy body, brown all but the narrow bottom, puts it into pajamas and into bed, and arranges the covers over it. He tells him, "You're a good boy." "Yup." "I'm going to go now. Don't be scared." "Daddy, go away?" "So you can sleep. I'll be back." "Okay, good." "Good." "Daddy." "What?" "Is baby Becky dead?" "Yes." "Was she frightened?" "Oh, no, she wasn't frightened." "Is she happy?" "Yeah, she's very happy now." "Good." "Don't you worry about it." "Okay." "You snuggle up." "Yup." "Think about throwing stones." "When I grow up, I'll throw them very far." "That's right. You can throw them pretty far now." "I know it." "Okay, go to sleep." Downstairs, he asks Springer, who is washing dishes in the kitchen, "You don't want me to stay here tonight, do you?" "Not tonight, Harry. I'm sorry. I think it would be better not tonight." "Okay, sure. I'll go back to the apartment. Shall I come over in the morning?" "Yes, please. We'll give you breakfast." "No, I don't want any. I mean, to see Janice when she wakes up." "Yes, of course." "You think she'll sleep the night through?" "I think so." I'm sorry I wasn't at the lot today." "Oh, that's nothing. That's negligible." "You don't want me to work tomorrow, do you?" "Of course not. I still have the job, don't I?" "Of course." His talk is gingerly. His eyes fidget. He feels his wife is listening. "You're being awfully good to me." Springer doesn't answer. Harry goes out through the sun porch so he won't have to glimpse Mrs. Springer's face again, and around the house, and walks home in the soupy, tinkling dark. He lets himself into the apartment with his key and turns on all the lights as rapidly as he can. He goes into the bathroom, and the water is still in the tub. Some of it has seeped away, so the top of the water is an inch below a faint gray line on the porcelain, but the tub is still more than half full. A heavy, calm volume, odorless, tasteless, colorless. The water shocks him, like the presence of a silent person in the bathroom. Stillness makes a dead skin on its unstirred surface. There's even a kind of dust on it. He rolls back his sleeve and reaches down and pulls the plug. The water swings and the drain gasps. He watches the line of water slide slowly and evenly down the wall of the tub, and then with a crazed, vortical cry, the last of it is sucked down. He thinks how easy it was, yet in all his strength God did nothing. Just that little rubber stopper to lift. In bed, he discovers that his legs ache from all the walking he did in Brewer today. His shins feel splintered. No matter how he twists, the pain, after a moment of relief gained by the movement, sneaks back. He tries praying to relax him, but it doesn't do it. There's no connection. He opens his eyes to look at the ceiling, and the darkness is mottled with an unsteady network of veins like the net of yellow and blue that mottled the skin of his baby. He remembers seeing her neat red profile through the window at the hospital, and a great draft of horror sweeps through him, brings him struggling out of bed to turn on the lights. The electric glare seems thin. His groin aches to weep. He is afraid to stick even his hand into the bathroom. He fears if he turns on the light, he will see a tiny, wrinkled blue corpse lying face up on the floor of the drained tub. Fear presses on his kidneys, and he is at last forced to dare. The dark bottom of the tub leaps up blank and white. He expects never to go to sleep, and awaking with the slant of sunshine and the noise of doors slamming downstairs, feels his body has betrayed his soul. He dresses in haste, more panicked now than at any time yesterday. The event is realer. Invisible cushions press against his throat and slow his legs and arms. The kink in his chest has grown thick and crusty. Forgive me, he keeps saying silently to no one. He goes over to the Springers, and the tone of the house has changed. He feels everything has been rearranged slightly to make a space into which he can fit by making himself small. Mrs. Springer serves him orange juice and coffee, and even speaks, cautiously. Do you want cream? No, I'll drink it black. We have cream if you want it. No, really, it's fine. Janice is awake. He goes upstairs and lies down on the bed beside her. She clings to him and sobs into the cup between his neck and jaw and the sheet. Her face has been shrunk. Her body seems small as a child's, and hot and hard. She tells him, I can't stand to look at anyone except you. I can't bear to look at the others. It wasn't your fault, he tells her. It was mine. They cling together in a common darkness. He feels the walls between them dissolve in a flood of black, but the heavy knot of apprehension remains in his chest, his own. He stays in the house all that day. Visitors come and tiptoe about. Their manner suggests that Janice upstairs is very sick. They sit, these women, over coffee in the kitchen with Mrs. Springer, whose petite, rounded voice, oddly girlish, divorced from the side of her body, sighs on and on in indistinct syllables, like the morning chant of an ancient tribe. Peggy Fasnacht comes, her sunglasses off, her wall eyes wide to the world, and goes upstairs. Her son Billy plays with Nelson, and no one moves to halt their squeals of anger and pain in the backyard, which, neglected in time, die, and revive after a pause in the form of laughter. Even Harry has a visitor. The doorbell rings, and Mrs. Springer goes and comes into the dim room where Harry is sitting, looking at magazines, and says, in a surprised and injured voice, "A man for you." She leaves the doorway, and he gets up and walks a few steps forward to greet the man coming into the room, Totherow, leaning on a cane, and his face half paralyzed, but talking, walking, alive. "Hi, gee, how are you?" "Harry." With the hand that is not on the cane, he grips Harry's arm. He brings a long look to bear on Harry's face. His mouth is tweaked downward on one side. The skin over his eye on this side is dragged down diagonally so it nearly curtains the glitter. And it may be the bad light, but this whole side looks the color of stone. The gouging grip of his fingers trembles. "Let's sit down," Rabbit says, and helps him into an easy chair. Totherow knocks off a doily in arranging his arms. Rabbit brings over a straight chair and sits close so he won't have to raise his voice. "Should you be running around?" he asks when Tothero says nothing. "My wife brought me, in the car. Outside, Harry. We heard your terrible news. Didn't I warn you?" Already his eyes are bulging with water. "When?" "When?" The stricken side of his face is turned away, perhaps consciously, into shadow, so his smile seems wholly alive, wise, and sure. "That first night, I said go back. I begged you." "I guess you did. I've forgotten." "No, you haven't. No, you haven't, Harry." His breath chuffs on the ha of Harry. "Let me tell you something. Will you listen?" "Sure." "Right and wrong," he says, and stops. His big head shifts, and the stiff downward lines of his mouth and bad eye show. "Right and wrong aren't dropped from the sky. We make them. Against misery. Invariably, Harry, invariably." His pride at negotiating the long word shows, simple as a boy's. "Misery follows their disobedience. Not our own, often at first, not our own. Now you've had an example of that in your own life." Rabbit wonders when the tear trails appeared on Tothero's cheeks. There they are. "Do you believe me?" "Sure, sure. Look, I know this has been my fault. I've felt like an insect ever since the thing happened." Tothero's tranquil smile deepens. A faint rasping purr comes out of his face. "I warned you," he says, his diction quickening. "I warned you, Harry, but youth is deaf. Youth is careless." Harry blurts, "But what can I do?" Tothero doesn't seem to hear. "Don't you remember my begging you to go back?" "I don't know. I guess so." "Good. Ah, you're still a fine man, Harry. You have a healthy body. When I'm dead and gone, remember how your old coach told you to avoid suffering. Remember." The last word is intoned coyly, with a little wag of the head. On the thrust of this incongruous vivacity, he rises from his chair and prevents himself from pitching forward by quick use of his cane. Harry jumps up in alarm, and the two of them stand for the moment very close. The old man's big head breathes a distressing scent, not so much medicine as a sweet vegetable staleness. "You young people," he says with a rising intonation, a schoolteacher's tone, scolding yet sly, even encouraging, "tend to forget, don't you? Now don't you?" He wants this admission mysteriously much. "Sure," Rabbit says, praying he'll go. Harry helps him to his car, a '57 blue and cream Dodge waiting in front of the orange fire hydrant. Mrs. Tothero offers, rather coolly, her regrets at the death of his infant daughter. She looks harried and noble. Gray hair straggles down across her finely wrinkled silver temple. She wants to get away from him, away with her prize. Beside her on the front seat, Tothero looks like a smirking gnome, brainlessly stroking the curve of his cane. Rabbit returns to the house feeling depressed and dirtied by the visit. Tothero's revelation chilled him. He wants to believe in the sky as the source of all things. Eccles comes in the late afternoon to complete the arrangements for the funeral. It will be held tomorrow afternoon, Wednesday. As he leaves, Rabbit catches his attention and they talk in the front hall a moment. "What do you think?" Rabbit asks. "About what?" "What shall I do?" Eccles glances up nervously. He is very tired. Harry has never seen him look so tired. His face has that pale, babyish look of someone who has not slept enough. "Do what you are doing," he says. "Be a good husband, a good father, love what you have left." "And that's enough?" "You mean to earn forgiveness?" "I'm sure it is, carried out through a lifetime." "I mean," he's never before felt pleading with Eccles, "remember that thing we used to talk about? The thing behind everything?" "Harry, you know I don't think that thing exists in the way you think it does." "Okay." He realizes that Eccles wants to get away too, that the sight of himself is painful, disgusting. Eccles must see that he senses this, for he abruptly summons up mercy and makes an attempt. "Harry, it's not for me to forgive you. You've done nothing to me to forgive. I'm equal with you in guilt. We must work for forgiveness. We must earn the right to see that thing behind everything. Harry, I know that people are brought to Christ. I've seen it with my eyes and tasted it with my mouth. And I do think this. I think marriage is a sacrament, and that this tragedy, terrible as it is, has at last united you and Janice in a sacred way. Through the next hours, Rabbit clings to this belief, though it seems to bear no relation to the colors and sounds of the big sorrowing house, the dabs and arcs of late sunshine in the little jungle of plants on the glass table, or the almost wordless supper he and Janice share in her bedroom. He spends that night in the Springers' house, sleeping with Janice. Her sleep is so solid. A thin snore out of her black mouth sharpens the moonlight and keeps him awake. He gets up on an elbow and studies her face. It is frightening in the moonlight, small and smeared by patches of dark cut. It seems in a soft substance that lacks the edges of a human presence. He resents her sleep. When in sunlight he feels her weight stir and slide off the bed, he turns his face deeper into the pillow, retracts his head half under the covers, and goes back to sleep stubbornly. Sleep is a safe cave. Today is the last day of his abnormal life. Today is the funeral. Tomorrow he is scheduled to go back to work. He has a vivid dream. He is alone on a large sporting field or vacant lot littered with small pebbles. In the sky, two perfect discs, identical in size, but the one a dense white and the other slightly transparent, move toward each other slowly. The pale one is directly above the dense one. At the moment they touch, he feels frightened, and a voice like over a loudspeaker at a track meet announces, "The cowslip swallows up the elder." The downward gliding of the top one continues steadily until the other, though the stronger, is totally eclipsed, and just one circle is before his eyes, pale and pure. He understands the cowslip is the moon, and the elder the sun, and that what he has witnessed is the explanation of death. Lovely life eclipsed by lovely death. With great excitement he realizes he must go forth from this field and found a new religion. There is a feeling of the discs and the echo of the voice bending over him importunately, and he opens his eyes. Janice stands by the bed in a brown skirt and a pink sleeveless blouse. There is a drab thickness of fat under her chin he has never noticed before. He is surprised to be on his back. He almost always sleeps on his stomach. He realizes it was a dream, that he has nothing to tell the world, and the knot regathers in his chest. In getting out of bed, he kisses the back of her hand, which is hanging by her side, helpless and raw. She makes him breakfast, the cereal drowned in milk, the coffee scalded in her style. With Nelson, they walk over to the apartment to get clothes for the funeral. Rabbit resents her being able to walk, resents her not dying of remorse and shame. What kind of grief is it that permits them to walk? The sense of their thick bodies just going on, wrapping their hearts in numbness and small needs, angers him. They walk with their child through streets they walked as children. The gutter along Potter Avenue, where the slime-rimmed ice plant water used to run, is dry. The houses, many of them no longer lived in by the people whose faces he all knew, are like the houses in a town you see from the train, their brick faces blank, imposing the riddle. Why does anyone live here? Why was he set down here? Why in this town, a dull suburb of a third-rate city? For him, the center and index of a universe that contains immense prairies, mountains, deserts, forests, coastlines, cities, seas, the childish mystery, the mystery of any place, prelude to the ultimate, "Why am I me?" starts panic in his heart. Coldness spreads through his body, and he feels detached, as if at last he is, what he's always dreaded, walking on air. The details of the street, the ragged margin where the pavement and grass struggle, the tarry, scarred trunks of the telephone poles, no longer speak to him in a child's intimate, excited voice. He is no one. It is as if he stepped outside of his body and brain a moment to watch the engine run and stepped into nothingness. For this he had been merely a refraction, a vibration within the engine, and now can't get back in. He feels he is behind the windows of the houses they walk by, watching this three-cornered family walk along solidly, with no sign that their universe has convulsed, other than the woman's quiet tears. Janice's tears have come as gently as dew comes. The sight of the morning fresh streets seems to have sprung them. When they get inside the apartment, she gives a sharp sigh and collapses against him. Perhaps she didn't expect the place to be full of sunshine. Buttresses of dust drifting in milky light slant from the middle of the floor to the tops of the windows and touch everything with innocence and newness and hopefulness. The door to his closet is near the entry door, so they needn't go very deep into the apartment at first. He opens the closet door as far as he can without bumping the television set, and reaches far in and unzips a plastic zippered storage bag and takes out his blue suit, a winter suit made of wool, but the only dark one he owns. Nelson ranges through the apartment, going wee-wee in the bathroom, finding an old rubber panda in his bedroom that he wants to take along. His exploring drains enough of the menace from the rooms for them to go into their bedroom, where Janice's clothes hang. On the way, she indicates a chair. "Here I sat," she says, "yesterday morning, watching the sun come up." Her voice is lifeless. He doesn't know what she wants him to say and says nothing. He is holding his breath. In the bedroom, there is a pretty moment. She takes off her skirt and blouse to try on an old black suit she has, and as she moves about in her slip, barefoot on the carpet, she reminds him of the girl he knew, with her narrow ankles and wrists and small, shy head. The black suit, bought when she was in high school, doesn't fit. Her stomach is still too big from having the baby, and maybe her mother's plumpness is beginning. Standing there, trying to get the waist of the suit skirt to link at her side, the tops of her breasts pushing above her bra as she bends into the effort, the space between them dimpling into a dark crease, she does have a plumpness, a sweet plumpness that pleases him. He thinks, mine, my woman. But then she straightens up and her smeared, frantic face blots out his pride of possession. She becomes a liability that painfully weights the heaviness already below his chest. This is the wild woman he must steer with care down a lifelong path, away from yesterday. "It won't do it," she screams, and jerks her legs out of the skirt and flings it, great twirling bat, across the room. "You have nothing else? What am I going to do? Come on, let's get out of here and go back to your place. This place is making you nervous." "But we're going to have to live here." "Yeah, but not today. Come on." "We can't live here," she says. "I know we can't." "But where can we live? We'll figure it out. Come on." She stumbles into her skirt and puts her blouse over her arms and turns away from him meekly and asks, "Button my back?" Buttoning the pink cloth down her quiet spine somehow makes him cry. The hotness in his eyes works up to a sting, and he sees the little babyish buttons through a cluster of discs of watery light like petals of apple blossoms. Water hesitates on his lids and then runs down his cheeks. The wetness is delicious. He wishes he could cry for hours, for just this tiny spill relieves him. But a man's tears are rare, and his stop before they are out of the apartment. As he closes the door, he feels he has already spent his whole dry life opening and closing this door. Nelson takes the rubber panda along, and every time he makes it squeak, it makes Rabbit's stomach ache. The town now is bleached by a sun nearing the height of noon. Mrs. Springer, when Janice tells what happened, bustles around and finds an old black dress of hers that, with skillful pinning and a little sewing, she thinks will do. She and Janice go upstairs, and after half an hour, Janice comes down wrapped in black. "Harry, does it look all right? What in the hell do you think this is going to be, a fashion show?" The idea that she can wear her mother's clothes infuriates him. He adds regretfully, "You look fine, but the damage is done." Janice is wounded and collapses upstairs, and Mrs. Springer revokes the small measure of tolerance she had extended to him. The house again fills with the unspoken thought that he is the murderer. He accepts the thought gratefully. It's true, he is, and hate suits him better than forgiveness. Immersed in hate, he doesn't have to do anything. He can be paralyzed, and the rigidity of hatred makes a kind of shelter for him. He reads Nelson a little golden book about a little choo-choo who was afraid of tunnels but finally became courageous. Mrs. Springer comes in and bites off the word lunch. Harry says he doesn't want any, but taking courage from the storybook, goes into the kitchen to supervise and guard Nelson. Mrs. Springer manages to keep her back to him all the time. When Nelson is finished with his soup and raw carrots and Lebanon bologna sandwich, Harry takes him upstairs and settles him in bed, and then resumes sitting in the living room chair. Janice has fallen asleep, and the sound of Mrs. Springer's sewing machine spins out into the bird song and murmur of the early afternoon. Janice wakes up and comes down to the refrigerator, and then goes up again, and her voice and her mother's mingle. Mr. Springer comes home, comes in, and tries to talk about nothing, and senses that Harry's status in the house has gone down again. He trots upstairs to the women. Footfalls pad above. Fancy dishes in the glass-fronted cupboard behind Harry vibrate. He wonders if the pain in his stomach comes from eating so little in the last 2 days, and goes out to the kitchen and eats 2 crackers. He can feel each bite hit a scraped floor inside. The pain increases. The bright porcelain fixtures, the steel doors, all seem charged with a negative magnetism that pushes against him and makes him extremely thin. He goes into the shadowy living room, and at the front window watches 2 teenage girls in snug shorts shuffle by on the sunny sidewalk. Their bodies are already there, but their faces are still this side of being good. Funny about girls about 14, their faces have this kind of eager, bunchy business. Too much candy sours their skin. They walk as slowly as the time to the funeral passes. Daughters. These are daughters. Would June... He chokes the thought. The girl's long legs and slow-developed motions seem distasteful and unreal. He himself, watching them behind the window, seems a smudge on the glass. He wonders why the universe doesn't just erase a thing so dirty and small. He looks at his hands, and they seem fantastically ugly. He goes upstairs and with intense care washes his hands and face and neck. He doesn't dare use one of their fancy towels. Coming out with wet hands, he meets Springer in the muted hallway and says, "I don't have a clean shirt." Springer says, "Wait," and brings him a shirt and black cufflinks. Harry dresses in the room where Nelson sleeps. Sunlight under the drawn shades, the boy's heavy breath. It takes less time to dress than he hoped it would. The wool suit is uncomfortably hot, but something stubborn in him refuses to take off the coat. He sits immaculately dressed, the shirt too tight, in the living room, looking at the tropical plants on the glass table, moving his head so that now this leaf eclipses that, now that this, and wondering if he is going to throw up. His insides are a clenched mass of dread, a tough bubble that can't be pricked. Of the things he dreads, he is most conscious of seeing his parents. He hasn't had the courage to call them or see them since the thing happened. Mrs. Springer called Mom Monday night and asked her to the funeral. The silence from his home since then has frightened him. It's one thing to get hell from other people, and another from your own parents. Ever since he came back from the army, Pop had been nibbling at a grudge because he wouldn't go to work in the shop, and in a way had nibbled himself right into nothing in Harry's heart. All the mildness and kindness the old man had ever shown him had faded into nothing. But his mother was something else. She was still alive, and was still attached to the cord of his life. If she comes in and gives him hell, he thinks he'll die rather than take it. And of course, what else is there to give him? Whatever Mrs. Springer says, he can slip away from, because in the end, she has to stick with him. And anyway, he feels somehow she wants to like him. But with his mother, there's no question of liking him. They're not even in a way separate people. He began in her stomach. And if she gave him life, she can take it away. And if he feels that withdrawal, it will be the grave itself. Of all the people in the world, he wants to see her least. He wishes she'd die. At last they're ready, Mr. Springer in a spiffy dark gray drip and dry, and Nelson in a sissy suit with straps, and Mrs. in a black felt hat with a veil and a stem of purple berries, and Janice all pinned and hemmed in, but still looking broad and sooty in her mother's fat dress. She doesn't wear a hat. The undertaker's black Cadillac comes and takes them to the funeral parlor. It was once a house, but now is carpeted the way no house ever was. pale green carpets that deaden your steps like an inch of dust on the floor. Little silver tubes on the wall shield a yellowish light, and the colors everywhere. On all the walls and curtains you can see are colors no one would live with: salmon and aqua, and the violet that kills germs on toilet seats. They come up a flagstone walk in the sunshine, past frothy green bushes into this, and wait in a little pink side room. Harry can see into the main room. On a few rows of auditorium chairs, about 6 people sit, 5 of them women. The only one he knows is Peggy Gring. Her little boy, wriggling beside her, makes 7. It was meant to be at first nobody but the families, but the Springers then asked a few close friends. His parents are not here. Somewhere, someone's boneless hands trail up and down the keys of an electric organ. The unnatural coloring of the interior comes to a head in the hothouse flowers arranged around a little white coffin. The coffin, with handles of painted gold, rests on a platform covered with a deep purple curtain. He thinks the curtain might draw apart and reveal, like a magician's trick, the living baby underneath. Janice looks in and yields a startled whimper, and an undertaker's man, blond and young with an unnaturally red face, conjures a bottle of spirits of ammonia out of his side pocket. Her mother holds it under her nose, and she suppresses a face of disgust. Her eyebrows stretch up, showing the bumps her eyeballs make under the thin membrane. Harry takes her arm and turns her so she can't see into the next room. The side room has a window through which they can look at the street, where children and cars are running. "Hope the minister hasn't forgotten," the young red-faced man says, and to his own embarrassment chuckles. He can't help being at his ease here. "Does that happen often?" Mr. Springer asks. He is standing behind his wife, and his face tips forward with curiosity. A birdy black gash below his pale mustache. Mrs. Springer has sat down on a chair, is pressing her palms against her face through the veil. The purple berries tremble in their stem of wire. "About twice a year," is the answer. A familiar old Plymouth slows against the curb outside, and Rabbit's mother gets out and looks up and down the sidewalk angrily. His heart leaps and trips his tongue. Here come my parents, as if giving a warning. And they do all come to attention, as if to withstand an attack. Mrs. Springer gets up, and Harry places himself between her and Janice. Standing in formation with the Springers like this, he can at least show his mother that he's reformed, that he's accepted and been accepted. The undertaker's man goes out to bring them in. Harry can see them standing on the bright sidewalk, arguing which door to go into. Mim a little to one side. Dressed in a quiet suit and with no makeup, she reminds him of the little sister he once had. The sight of his parents makes him wonder why he was afraid of them. His mother comes through the door first. Her eyes sweep the line of them, and she steps toward him with reaching, curved arms. "Hassie, what have they done to you?" She asks this out loud and wraps him in a hug as if she would carry him back to the sky from which they have fallen. This quick it opens and seals shut again. In a boyish reflex of embarrassment, he pushes her away and stands to his full height. As if unaware of what she has said, his mother turns and embraces Janice. He is relieved to see her act courteously, normally. Pop, murmuring, shakes Springer's hand. Mim comes and touches Harry on the shoulder, and then squats and whispers to Nelson, these two the youngest. All under him, Harry feels these humans knit together. His wife and mother cling together. His mother began the embrace automatically, but has breathed a great life of grief into it. Her face creases in pain. Janice, rumpled and smothered, yet responds. Her weak black arms try to encircle the great frame, yearning against her. Mrs. Angstrom yields up 2 words to her. The others are puzzled. Only Harry, from his tall, cool height, sees. His mother has been propelled by the instinct that makes us embrace those we wound. And then she had felt this girl in her arms as a member with her of an ancient, abused slave race. And then she had realized that, having restored her son to herself, she too must be deserted. He had felt in himself these stages of grief unfold in her as her arms tightened. Now she releases Janice and speaks sadly and properly to the Springers. They have let her first outcry pass as madness. They, of course, have done nothing to Harry, What has been done, he has done to them.